Hi everyone, a video for my year 2 forensics. So this is for unit 34. So these are the things we've been doing the last term or so. So there's 3 main sections you need to have a look at. The first one was eyewitness testimony, where we covered at the start, particularly the Loftus and Palmer experiment. So for each of these 3 categories, you need to be answering these questions at the top. Okay, so for eyewitness testimony, the area of the criminal justice system we're talking about is the cognitive interview. So for eyewitness testimony, you need to talk about the theories. So what do people believe about eyewitnesses? Do they believe they're good? Do they believe they're bad? Do they believe they're better in some circumstances, such as the weapon focus effect? Where is the argument there about people saying that people are better when there's a weapon and others saying that people are worse when there's a weapon? So what do the theories say? What do they believe? Then what research has been conducted? Keep this bit quite short, and you'll see later because we talk about more about the research later. So what research has been conducted? So obviously for this one you can mention Loftus and Palmer and Loftus and Zanni, the weapon focus effect. So what does it show? Briefly, what does it show? Does it show that eyewitnesses are good, or does it show that eyewitnesses are poor? And how does this relate to the criminal justice system policy we've been given? So for eyewitness testimony, it's the cognitive interview. So basically in Loftus and Palmer's experiment, they changed the phrasing of the question. So they asked leading questions, and this led to a change in the answer that came from the participants. So the criminal justice system process that was put in place to counteract this was the cognitive interview. So things such as no leading questions, open-ended questions, so the participant, the interviewee, is given a chance to answer rather than words being put into their mouth. This is also happens in the courtroom. So people are asked questions along a certain line and are not allowed to make suggestive questions or leading questions. So due to this research, the process has changed. So they do new things in interviews because of the research that showed that leading questions changed eyewitness testimonies, the people's answers. Basically, they changed what they thought they saw based on the wording and the questions that were asked. Okay, bullet point number 2, we've got conformity and obedience. Now this is an interesting one. So we've got several types of conformity. You've got conformity to a label. So do people conform to a label that they've been given? So if somebody is given a label as a hoodlum or a student, do you kind of live up and conform to that label that you've been given? So that's one type of conformity. The other type of conformity is in a group. So that's kind of the one we're getting at here, is if you're in a group, would you agree to things just because other people had said it? Now, particularly in juries, this is the criminal justice system policy we're looking at. So jury decision making, do people conform to what everybody else is saying just because it's easier? They want to go home, they believe they should, they're pressured into it. Do they conform just because they have to? Obedience is more obedience to somebody in a perceived higher role than yourself. So would you obey instructions from somebody just because they seem to be in a higher position than you are, so you feel you have to do as you're told? So for this one, where are we? Conformity and obedience. So this one, we have chatted in class about the Nazis. So the Nazi soldiers obviously obeying the rules they were given. I know it's slightly off topic, but they have now been charged. There are some Nazi SS soldiers that have been come into court to be charged with manslaughter or murder, even though they were following instructions. And that was their argument, that they were following instructions and they would be dead if they didn't. So I know that's quite an extreme example, but in jury decision making, do people conform? That's what you need to talk about there. The third one here is anger management, social skills training and diminished responsibility questions. So in this is more about sentencing. So we're up to the other end of the courtroom. So anger management training. So this is perhaps a program of rehabilitation that's suggested for those that they believe need it, either by the offence that's been taken or the previous that the person has in court. So anger management training. So you could talk about anger management training and social skills training. Is that something to do with personality types? Is it something to do with whether they've not had access to sort of family environments, and they may need or perceive to be needing social skills training? Diminished responsibility. So these are questions that can be asked to do with sentencing. So would somebody's sentence be changed because of diminished responsibility? And the answer is yes, obviously. Insanity defence would be one, battered wife syndrome would be another, and there are a few other different ones along a similar vein. So how has sentencing changed according to what we believe causes crime? So this depends on your own opinion as well. So whether you think it's a personality that causes crime with the anger management social skills training, will that work if it's a personality that causes crime? Will it work if the person's not been in a family environment and they've been brought up in a less than ideal environment, let's say? Will the sentencing or will the rehabilitation program put in place, do you believe it would help these scenarios? Diminished responsibility, things like the battered wife syndrome, where there's been a few in the news lately. Would we change our sentencing for a battered wife who has been perhaps subject to abuse for many, many years? And is there any research into sort of post-traumatic stress disorder where these women or men actually suffer from PTSD, and that's perhaps why they were driven to cause crime? So depending on what you believe causes crime or what the research theory believes causes crime, changes the sentencing. Okay, so for this second section, you only need to focus on one area. So either the area I gave you, or if you absolutely prefer another area and when you were doing your research you found quite a great deal, feel free to choose another area if that suits you. And you need to talk about lots of studies this time, so 2 or 3 studies or research conducted. And you do need to kind of pick apart the study in this section. So how was it conducted? Was it fair? How many people were there? What did the results show? Was it sort of conclusive, or was it a little bit sketchy, inconclusive, not reliable results? Do you think we can rely on this research? So whether it's Loftus-Palmer conformity and obedience, the Milgram study, do you think we can rely on this research? Is it realistic? Is it valid? Is it repeatable? And is it relevant to modern day crime? So this is quite a key one, actually. Is this still relevant in the courtroom today? I'd say with diminished responsibility, it possibly would be. Not sure about anger management and social skills training, whether I think perhaps perception has changed as to what causes crime. Depends what your beliefs are there, so you can talk about that. Eyewitness testimony, again, the cognitive interview is a standard process now, and standard that a solicitor or anybody questioning in court can't use leading questions, although there is the argument obviously that the jury has already heard it, and if you want to comment on that you can do that. The jury has already heard and they're told to disregard it, but you know, can that actually happen? Can you disregard something you've heard? So in relation to this research, so several studies of research, perhaps opposing research might be good to include here. So particularly the weapon focus effect is one I can think of straight away. Some research has suggested people remember remember lots of details when there was a weapon, and other research I think conducted before it said that people don't remember anything because there was a weapon, so they are focusing on the weapon. So that would be good if you've got some opposing research for that one, and you can argue for and against. So this is the detailed bit you need to include here. So how effective has the change in this policy? So whether your subject was the cognitive interview, whether your subject was jury decision making, conformity and obedience, or whether your subject was sentencing. how effective has that change in policy been? So do we now have a fair courtroom procedure? Do people question correctly? Is everybody treated correctly? Do you think they reach the right decisions? Fair decisions based on all the information, unbiased decisions perhaps in the courtroom. So have the policies meant, and this depends on which one you've chosen. So the first one would be better witnesses, so fewer false charging situations. The second bullet point above would be fairer jury decisions. So do they make fairer jury decisions, or do you think there is still an element of conformity or obedience or pressure? Is there more appropriate sentencing now for everybody? Does everybody get the rehabilitation that they require? Does everybody get the sentence that they deserve, perhaps? So insanity defence, can you say for or against the insanity defence, battered wife syndrome, and anger management? Do you believe that works? And then what you really want to do in here, which would be get you towards the top marks, would be some statistics. So you're looking at reoffending rates. So if people go through anger management, are the reoffending rates less? If they go through social skills training, is the reoffending less? Are the jury decision-making process, is it fair? So for that, you could talk about false charging perhaps previously. I think there's quite a few examples from quite a few years ago, I'd say plus 10 years, where people were incorrectly charged. There's lots for the cognitive interview, unfortunately, where people were questioned in a unacceptable manner that would be unacceptable now and unacceptable to most people morally, and got false confessions for the first one, the cognitive interview. So are there any statistics that you can use? You really need to put some statistics back in here for particularly reoffending rates, or the fact that the wrong people were charged because of the way it was questioned, or the reliance on eyewitness testimony previously, where now we know that that is not reliable. Okay, so if you have completed, you need all three for the first section. Okay, so you need to describe and explain all three for the first section. Now remember, the second section is just one, and you need to go into a lot more detail on the research. So in the first section, keep it quite short on the research. In the second section, that's when you can go into a lot of detail and almost pick the research apart. Is the study valid? How many people was it on, etc, etc, etc. So really go to town on that and start to evaluate sort of for and against, the positives and the negatives of the studies that you look at. And then I really want your conclusion to be about the courtroom procedures. Are they fair? Are they working? Do we think we could still make some improvements? And some statistics to back it up. Okay, so I hope that's helped you with what you need to be doing for our Unit 34, so our criminal psychology.